Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. It was in January last year that Sebi passed a scathing order against Price Waterhouse Coopers, PwC as it is popularly called, and which happens to be a giant multinational accounting and audit firm and a member of the Big Four. The order of Sebi said that PwC was guilty of having participated in the Satyam fraud and it banned PwC from undertaking audit of any listed entity in India for a period of 2 years. It was a shocking order and an alarming one for PwC because apart from it being a permanent taint on its professional reputation, it also would mean that PwC would be out of the audit business in India for a period of 2 years. As expected, PwC promptly challenged this order of Sebi before the Securities Appellate Tribunal, SAT as it is called, and SAT yesterday passed an order reversing the order of Sebi and in an equally scathing manner absolving PwC of any such charges, giving it a huge favorable order to PwC. This order of SAT for the time being settles the rules of the game in respect of corporate frauds and roles of auditors therein in India until the matter is finally decided by the Supreme Court because Sebi is very likely to challenge this order of SAT in the Supreme Court. We will see what the order then comes, but at the moment the rules of the game are laid. Before we go further in this case, it is important to go back into what was Satyam all about. Satyam, or Tech Mahindra as it is now called, has been a prominent IT company of India. Between 2000 to 2009, it recorded a stunning performance, a huge rise in growth, sales and profitability. And it was in January 2009 that its promoter Ramalingan Raju, in a huge confession mail, laid out a giant fraud that was committed by Satyam for years together. He said that the balance sheet and profit and loss account of Satyam were fabricated and forged and falsified, and they were not showing the correct financial performance and position of Satyam. The long and short of what he said was that Satyam very elaborately perpetrated a fraud. He said that they issued bogus invoices, bogus sales invoices to show bogus income, bogus profits, to show a rosy performance which was never there. And against these bogus profits, he said, the balance sheet of Satyam showed a bogus, fraudulent, false bank balance of about 7,800 crores, which was the size of this entire scam. It was an alarming one. He also incidentally mentioned that the statutory auditors of Satyam, which is PwC, were not aware of this entire fraud, fabrication of financial statements. All hell broke loose and all agencies got into motion. The Institute of Chartered Accountants of India started proceeding against the signing partners of PwC and PwC on charges of gross misconduct and negligence. And finally, those two auditors were actually debarred from life from undertaking any practice of a chartered accountant. Sebi also got into motion and Sebi issued a notice to PwC on grounds that public interest, public shareholder interests were violated because of this alleged negligence and fraudulent misconduct of PwC. PwC promptly challenged the very jurisdiction of Sebi to issue such a notice, and the matter went to the Bombay High Court in 2010. Bombay High Court at that point of time held that Sebi could get into the matter in order to protect shareholder interests, but only to the extent of investigating whether PwC was part of this conspiracy, whether PwC had participated in a fraud, and it said that Sebi could not look into any charges of professional negligence by PwC, which it said was the domain and jurisdiction of the ICAI. Sebi thus conducted its investigation, and last year, as I said, it passed its order. The order of Sebi was a fierce and scathing one, and it held PwC guilty of not having exercised enough due diligence in the matter. It said that PwC was guilty of gross negligence, in as much as that PwC should have sought direct confirmations of those invoices, those sales, and those bank balances and fixed deposits from the third parties concerned. It thus said that one of the major bogus balances shown by Satyam was of Bank of Baroda, New York, and it said that PwC wrongly relied on the bank statements that were given by the Satyam management, and that it should have directly sought confirmation of these fixed deposits and bank balances. That is what it said it should have done, even in respect of those bogus invoices which were given to it by the Satyam management. Sebi thus held PwC to be guilty of recklessness, to be guilty of very consciously signing false data, which it said was certified in a very fraudulent manner. It thus held PwC to be guilty of being complicit in this entire fraud. That was a shocker of an order. Yesterday, SAT overturned this entire guilt that was foisted on PwC by Sebi. In a very elaborate 125-page order yesterday, SAT observed that this was a very intricate fraud laid by the management, and where it said the fraud is very intricate, very sophisticated, not easy to detect at first sight, then the auditors cannot be held guilty of having participated in the fraud or having approved it. SAT thus distinguished between an audit and a forensic audit and said that a statutory auditor is not expected to be a forensic auditor who goes about unearthing frauds. It thus said that PwC was not a party to these fabricated financial statements, and thus there was no willful connivance in the matter by PwC. SAT said that Sebi had held PwC guilty on charges of surmises, conjectures, and probabilities, which it said was not permissible. SAT very clearly said that it is the top management of Satyam which perpetrated the fraud, and it said Raju himself said in his confession that the statutory auditors were not aware of it, and in such a situation it said the auditors could not be held guilty of misconduct or having participated in the fraud. SAT further said that Sebi has no power to get into these cases. It is the Institute of Chartered Accountants which has this power, and Sebi has no jurisdiction to hold PwC guilty or even investigate the matter. And thus, SAT overturned this ban of 2 years and said no such ban can be levied on PwC. SAT very pertinently noted that ICAI has already taken suitable action in the matter. It also said that PwC since then has initiated enough rectification and remedial measures, and its conduct since then has been exemplary. It was very critical of Sebi taking 9 years to pass such an order. And very interestingly, SAT noted that at the moment, out of the 98 partners of PwC, 70 partners were never partners of PwC during the period 2000 to 2009 when this fraud was committed, and it thus said that they cannot be held guilty of what some other members of PwC did. SAT, of course, said that PwC had been negligent in the matter, and thus it said that the fees that PwC received from Satyam of about 13.09 crores, that needs to be disgorged, that needs to be taken back. Thus, SAT held PwC to be guilty of negligence but not guilty of a fraud, and it overturned the ban that was imposed on it. What are the lessons for all of us, for corporate India, for auditors and chartered accountants from this order of SAT? According to us, there are 5 issues. The first one is an audit is different from a forensic audit. The two are not the same. And a statutory auditor does not conduct a forensic audit, and he thus cannot be held guilty of any fraud or negligence where the frauds that are perpetrated by the management are intricate, complex, very well laid out, and very highly covered such that they cannot be unearthed at first sight. So the first one is an audit is not the same as a forensic audit. The second is where the auditor has conducted himself with the expected due diligence, and if there is any fraud found, he cannot be held guilty. An auditor cannot be held guilty if there are very intricate frauds that are laid by the management, and unless investigation or regulatory agencies do not prove the role of the chartered accountant or the auditor in these sophisticated frauds, they cannot be held guilty. And finally, SAT says, and which is the rule of the game, it is the issue of chartered accountants which can try auditors of professional negligence and misconduct, and not Sebi in any manner. SAT thus said that as per the directions of Bombay High Court in this case, Sebi could have only investigated whether PwC was guilty of any fraud participation or of having been party to a conspiracy, and not on charges of professional negligence, which it said PwC was guilty of as far as negligence is concerned, and thus those 13 crores were confiscated. Now comes the issue. What happens when there are frauds committed by the management? Does it mean that the statutory auditors will never be held guilty? Till the time the Supreme Court decides this case, yes, if there are sophisticated frauds of the management and the statutory auditors are not able to find them out, they will not be held guilty. Let's see what the top court finally says. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.